Good morning, this is Kris Shoemaker, also known as Yehudah ben Shomeyr, and you're listening to Coffee with Kris, the time of the day where we share a cup of coffee and share a bit of the Word of God. All right, it's a new week, therefore it's a new Torah portion. We are in the Torah portion of Emor, which means to speak. It's taken from Leviticus chapter 21, verse 1, all the way to chapter 24, verse 23. But today's Sidra, today's Aliyah, is taken from Leviticus chapter 21, verses 1 through 15, but we're going to focus on the first 6 verses. It says, Then Adonai said to Moses, Speak to the Kohanim, speak to the priest. This is the tribe of the Levites that take care of the service of the tabernacle and the temple. Speak to the Kohanim, the sons of Aaron, and say to them, A Kohen, a priest, is not to allow himself to become unclean for the dead among his people, except for his relatives that are nearest to him, his mother, his father, his son, his daughter, his brother, or his virgin sister who is near to them, who has no husband. For her he may allow himself to become unclean, but he is not to defile himself, a husband among his people, and so profane himself. Then it says in verse 5, Kohanim, priests, are not to shave their heads, nor shave off the corners of their beards, nor make any cuttings in their flesh. They are to be holy to their God, and not profane the name of their God, for they present the offerings of Adonai made by fire, the bread of their God. Therefore, they are to be holy, they are to be set apart. They're to be totally different and unique from the rest of the tribes, and from the tribes from the rest of the world. So the Kohanim are the mediators between God and men during this time of the tabernacle era. And it's interesting. The Torah gives us life instructions on virtually every aspect of our life: how we dress, how we eat, how we worship, how we conduct business, how we farm, how we treat other people, etc. It even goes into the proper way or a pleasing way to grieve in a way that's pleasing in the eyes of God. Now, every culture has its traditions and customs on how to mourn the loss of a loved one. For instance, in Judaism, they cover up all the mirrors, they take all the cushions off the furniture, and everybody sits on the floor. They usually maybe, have a jacket that they kind of rip a little bit to show their grieving and their mourning. And they sit, what they call what is sitting Shiva. In other words, they mourn very, very heavily for a 7-day period. And friends and family come over to comfort and to be with them and to help take care of the needs. That's a Jewish Hebraic way. And other cultures have different customs and traditions on how to grieve and on how to mourn the loss of a loved one. Sometimes pagans would rip out their own hair and their own beards. They would gash themselves with knives in order to show everyone that they are in mourning and that they are grieving. God said that this tradition, this custom among the pagans, how they grieve their dead, is unpleasing to the Lord because it mars and harms the body. And we are not to harm or mar our body in any way, shape, or form. Because a loved one dies doesn't mean that we get the right to punish ourselves or to harm ourselves, or physically harm ourselves in any way. So don't do harm to your body when showing grief and mourning. If you have this tendency to want to cut or have this tendency to want to harm yourself in any way when you lose a loved one, you need to find help in order to find healthy, productive, God-pleasing ways in order to grieve a loss of a loved one. Maybe you're going to even start your own custom and tradition that works for you. But the point is, don't harm yourself because you lost someone. And so, like I said, a lot of cultures are into this and do this, even still to this day. It wasn't just in the biblical period and era. You can still find this in tribes around the world today, that they will cut themselves or rip out their hair and beard or harm themselves in other ways when they lose a loved one to show their grief and to show their mourning. Another Hebraic way that really they don't do anymore, but they did in biblical times, is they would rent their clothing, they would rip their clothes, and then they would put ashes on their head. It sounds totally weird, totally bizarre to us, but that was the acceptable way of mourning in the Hebrew culture back in biblical times. You may find a few odd Orthodox sects of Judaism that may, still put ashes on their head or whatever. Another thing that they would do in biblical times would be to put on sackcloth, and sackcloth is a very coarse and itchy material. In other words, they took all comfort physical comfort away from them in order to fully immerse themselves in this process of grieving. Grieving is necessary, and grieving is healthy because death is unnatural. Death is something that never was supposed to have happened, but because of the fall, we live with death every day. And one day, when Yeshua returns, the dead are going to rise, and we're going to rise to die no more, and death will be done away with when Messiah Yeshua returns. So we have to put up with this death just for a temporary short period of time, and as a result, we have to learn how to properly grieve in such a way that doesn't harm us, harm others, but yet still pleases God, and still helps us to mourn, to be able to get out that grief so we don't bottle it up and contain and harbor unhealthy, unresolved feelings. Guys, thanks so much for listening. Go out there and have a great day. Have a great week. Shalom and Shavua Tov. Shavua Tov means have a great week. God bless.